welcome to Miss Hall's music class! I'm super excited to share some really fun songs today! Grab your word of the day. Tempo is the speed at which a passage of music is or should be played. Welcome to part 3 of the TikTok Bucket Beatbox Challenge. The finale! Let's review our song. Ready and sing. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, a hole. Let's review what has happened in the story so far. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, a hole. Then fix it, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Then fix it, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, fix it. With what shall I fix it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I fix it, dear Liza? With what? With straw, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. With a straw, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, a straw. The straw is too long, dear Liza, dear Liza. The straw is too long, dear Liza, too long. Cut the straw, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Cut the straw, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Cut it. With what shall I cut it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I cut it, dear Liza? With what? With a knife, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. With a knife, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, a knife. The knife is too blunt, dear Liza, dear Liza. The knife is too blunt, dear Liza, too blunt. But wet the knife then, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Wet the knife then, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Wet it. With what shall I wet it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I wet it, dear Liza? With what? With stone, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. With a stone, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, a stone. The stone is too dry, dear Liza, dear Liza. The stone is too dry, dear Liza, too dry. Read these next 3 verses with fluency. Ready? Go. The stone is too dry, dear Liza, dear Liza. The stone is too dry, dear Liza, too dry. Wet the stone then, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Wet the stone then, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Wet it. With what shall I wet it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I wet it, dear Liza? With what? What did Georgie find was wrong with the stone? That's right, it's too dry. It won't be able to sharpen the knife if it's too dry. Make a prediction. How will they wet the stone? What do you think they'll try next? Let's review our time signature. In order to identify the time signature, you have to look at the top number and the bottom number that tell us how to count our music. The top number tells us how many beats are in the measure. So here we see 6. There are 6 beats in the measure. The bottom number tells us what type of note gets 1 beat. On the bottom we see an 8. That represents an 8th note. If you look in the measure, you can see 6 eighth notes. Note that there are 2 16th notes before the first measure. That is called a pickup. What is it called? A pickup. Good. Let's review our beatboxing. In order to beatbox this song, we need 6 sounds to match our time signature of 6/8. Those sounds should last for an 8th note, like this. The next thing we decide is how fast or slow our beatboxing should go. That is going to be our tempo. How fast or slow is our tempo? So to beatbox fast, you just speed up your sounds, like this. In order to go slow, you slow down your sounds, like this. Let's read our last verses with fluency. Ready? And go. With the water, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. With the water, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, the water. In what shall I get it, dear Liza, dear Liza? In what shall I get it, dear Liza? In what? In the bucket, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. In the bucket, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, the bucket. But there's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza. A hole! What do they need to wet the stone? They need water. They need to wet the stone with water. But why can't they get the water? Because there's a hole in the bucket to get the water. What were Liza and Georgie trying to fix from the start? The bucket. There was a hole in the bucket. They tried all of these different things to try to fix it, only to realize they needed the bucket to fetch the water to fix the bucket. Now what are they gonna do? Let's try singing our last verses. Ready and sing. The stone is too dry, dear Liza, dear Liza. The stone is too dry, dear Liza, too dry. Wet the stone then, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Wet the stone then, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Wet it. With what shall I wet it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I wet it, dear Liza? With what? With the water, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. With the water, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, the water. In what shall I get it, dear Liza, dear Liza? In what shall I get it, dear Liza? In what? In the bucket, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. In the bucket, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, the bucket. But there's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, a hole. Rewind the video to try beatboxing with me singing. Now you can sing to my beatbox. Ready and go. let's talk about tempo. Tempo is the speed at which a passage of music is or should be played. The first one is largo, kind of like large, like you're taking large steps. Largo means slowly and broadly. So slow that it's like a turtle. The next one is adagio, slow and stately, like our elephant. Speeding up, we have andante. Andante means at a walking pace, like our giraffe. Allegro is even faster. It's fast, quickly, and bright, like our doggy. Then we speed up to vivace. Vivace means lively and fast, like a horse. And finally, we have our fastest one, presto. Presto means very fast, like a cheetah. Let's try singing or beatboxing our whole song. We are going to start slowly with largo and work our way up to adagio, andante, allegro, vivace, and presto. Every 3 verses, we will speed up. Sing with me or beatbox along.
There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, a hole. Then fix it, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Then fix it, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, fix it. With what shall I fix it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I fix it, dear Liza? With what? With a straw, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. With a straw, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, a straw. The straw is too long, dear Liza, dear Liza. The straw is too long, dear Liza, too long. Cut the straw, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Cut the straw, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Cut it. With what shall I cut it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I cut it, dear Liza? With what? With a knife, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. With a knife, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, a knife. The knife is too blunt, dear Liza, dear Liza. The knife is too blunt, dear Liza, too blunt. With the knife, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. With the knife, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, wet it. With what shall I wet it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I wet it, dear Liza? With what? with a stone, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, with a stone, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, a stone. The stone is too dry, dear Liza, dear Liza. The stone is too dry, dear Liza, too dry. Wet the stone then, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Wet the stone then, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. Wet it. With what shall I wet it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I wet it, dear Liza? With what? With the water, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. With the water, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, the water. In what shall I get it, dear Liza, dear Liza? In what shall I get it, dear Liza? In what? In the bucket, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, dear Georgie. In the bucket, dear Georgie, dear Georgie, the bucket. But there's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza. A hole.